Hi guys, your favorite biologist here, Ismail. I hope you're doing great. Today we're gonna talk about an important subject, and that is depression. 29% of the adults in the USA have been diagnosed with depression throughout their lifetime, which is very concerning. And the first line of treatment is psychotherapy, especially behavior therapy, and antidepressants, especially, and the most one being prescribed, SSRIs. You might be asking yourself, what are SSRIs? SSRIs stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what do they do? What does it mean? I don't understand. You have basically a brain cell producing serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that is thought to reduce anxiety, reduce depression. And they have the brain cell that's receiving the signal, and it has receptors for serotonin on it. And you have basically an enzyme or a protein between them. It's like a car, you can imagine it. It's called SERT, and it takes the serotonin back to the cell that is producing the serotonin. And why is this interesting? By blocking this enzyme, you have more serotonin available, which is thought to decrease depression. However, this is based on the theory of serotonin and depression, which has been debunked multiple times, that people who have depression have a deficiency in serotonin that needs to be replenished. And those medications which increase serotonin are of course good candidates based on this theory, which is wrong. And why is it wrong? Because there's not a single study proving that people who have depression have deficiencies in serotonin. They measure the serotonin. There is not a statistically significant difference between people who are depressed and normal people. When you reduce the amount of serotonin in healthy adults, they don't get depressed. Only people who are very, very depressed get a mild reduction in their mood. And this shows that, the theory is not really true, because when you reduce it in normal adults, they don't get depressed. And interestingly, when you increase the serotonin acutely, which also SSRIs do, and also you can give precursors like 5-HTP, high amounts of them, you can increase the serotonin in the brain abruptly, very fast, and you don't see improvements in depression. For SSRIs, you don't see those improvements in the short term, only in the long term, like some improvements on depression. But we'll get deeper into this later. So this theory is wrong. But of course the real question is, do SSRIs work? They work very bad, if at all. So when they measure depression, they measure it on the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. Usually Hamilton Depression Scale 17. And you have 52 points on it. The higher you have, the higher points you have, the more depression you have. Like 52 is the maximum. Anything above 23 is very depressed. And anything below 7 is normal. And 0 is basically you're the happiest person on earth. And SSRIs only reduce 2 points from 52. And this is very little. If you're like severely depressed, probably a little bit more, like between 3 and 4 points. But you have to know that the studies conducted on SSRIs are, in my opinion, very, very biased. Why? Because usually when you have a medication, you have a placebo group. You have one group who takes the medication, and you have another group that does not take the medication. And with SSRIs, they give both groups a medication, and then they stop the other group, the placebo, after a few weeks from taking the medication. And this is not a real placebo, in my opinion. And also with SSRIs, which you probably heard from your doctor, is that you cannot stop them abruptly because you can get a withdrawal from them. And even still, both groups, even the group where the placebo group, has strong reductions in depression, even in the long term. So if you look at the long term, both groups, the group who got the SSRIs for the long term and the other group, the placebo, which stopped taking them, both have very similar improvements. There are small differences between two of them. Like 80% in the improvements you see in the placebo group, which is like a big improvement in both groups. So are they really that effective? I will leave it to you. Only 2 points from 52. It's not really that effective. And for people who are thinking about taking their own life, for the long term, SSRIs don't show statistically significant differences between the placebo. So SSRIs don't reduce the risk of people taking their own life because of depression, sadly. And of course, all of this is very concerning, especially SSRIs have a lot of side effects, from gastrointestinal to people mentioning that they get, some people get even more depressed. I think like 7%, if I'm not mistaken, on SSRIs report that they feel worse. Between 30 and 50% don't get any improvements, and the majority of people get problems with their libido, and for men, their erection quality. And a lot of people also document blunting of emotion, so they don't feel happiness that much. But on the pro side is that some people, or a lot of people, report that their anxiety got reduced, and also their sleep improved, which some people suffer from depression needs this effect. But is it placebo or not? Because we saw in the two groups in studies that the placebo group got very similar improvements compared with an SSRI. So this is something we need to keep in mind. A newer theory on antidepressants compared to the serotonin theory is that you have one cell which is producing serotonin. It has autoreceptors, so it has receptors on it to measure the amount of serotonin being released. And when it gets activated, the cell produces less serotonin. But after a while, there's a desensitization, and this desensitization causes the cell basically to not notice the amount of serotonin it's producing. And this causes the cell to produce more serotonin. But the other cell has a receptor called, especially the 5-HT2A receptor. And when this gets activated, it's associated with reduction in depression and anxiety. This is like the newer theory, or the mechanism, or the proposed mechanism behind SSRIs. And still, this mechanism, in my opinion, has weaknesses, because it's known that serotonin receptors can downregulate very fast. This is why people cannot just stop their SSRIs. If you're watching this video, don't just stop taking your SSRIs. You get used to them, so the receptors downregulate. So even maybe in the long term, you produce more serotonin, you have more serotonin available, your receptors downregulate. If you took magic mushrooms or psilocybin, LSD, you will notice that the first time you will get hallucinations, and then if you keep doing it without having a break, you will notice that those substances like LSD and magic mushrooms don't work anymore. And they work on the same receptors, by the way, like serotonin. They work on the serotonin receptor, 5-HT2A receptor. So they downregulate very fast. So you have the problem with, basically you get dependent on SSRIs. They don't work very good, if at all, for like 30-50% of people they don't work, and you will get very likely side effects, especially sexual side effects. And some people get even worse on SSRIs for their depression. This is something you need to keep in mind. So okay, those, if we don't have like a real theory on depression, what is a mechanism? So the old theory is wrong. What is a new theory behind depression? So of course, depression can have multiple causes. It can be the first one is, of course, nutrient deficiencies or neurodegenerative diseases or damage to the brain. So generally anything that damages the brain, it can be Alzheimer or Parkinson, or even direct trauma to the head or toxins. This causes anxiety and depression. It has been shown also in animals. But I think this does not apply for most people. If you look between the year 2017 and 2023, you will see a 60% increase in mental health issues in adults in the USA. So of course you cannot explain it by this. So what happened in this time, if you look at society, so we have, of course, a lockdown. People got isolated, and isolation is one of the fastest ways to cause depression and mental health issues in animals. And it's not that you isolate them and then after you finish isolating them, they become normal again. No, this can have long-term lasting effects on them. If you look at especially the younger generation as an example, they don't go on dates as often and don't date. I think like 50% of men or something in the last year are single or don't meet anyone. There are like scary statistics, or every third person or like a virgin or something. So a lot of people isolate nowadays. It's very scary actually. So people got isolated, and in your room, like me right now, they sit in the dark. So this is, especially if you combine it with isolation, this can cause depression. And in addition to that, we have economic problems in the world. So people don't feel stable. They have they're always in anxiety. The prices are increasing, rent is increasing, everything is increasing. They don't have enough money for themselves and their families. And increases in anxiety like those over long periods can cause depression. Your economic status can cause you to have depression if you're very low, especially on income. So this is also a factor you have to keep in mind. In addition to that, a lot of people, of course, don't have healthy diets, and this causes inflammation. And inflammation, especially to the brain, caused by diet or toxins or even autoimmune or inflammatory conditions, are very strongly associated with mental health issues, especially depression. So this is also a factor. And if you look at the people in the West, a lot of people come from broken homes, so their parents are separated, or the community is not as strong as they used to be, so people feel isolated, and this is very important. And the parents being separate is a trauma for children. And even in animals, it's like this. If you take the child away from the mother, like the small mice away from the mother, it's a trauma. It can cause a depressed phenotype. A lot of people also get bullied. Bullying, you can also cause it in mice. It's called social defeat then. So you take like a dominant, strong mice and let it like bully a weaker mice, and then the mice develops long-term depression, like it's called depressed phenotype, like it acts depressed. So there are a lot of factors, and I think most people experience one of those. It can be isolation from the disease, and it can be sitting too much on social media and isolating, addiction. Social media, people spend way too much time on social media and video games or so on. And even if you talk with people there, it's not the same as sitting and talking to people directly. And because this is why those things are directly also associated with mental health issues. So we have diet, inflammation, and in some people they have neurodegenerative diseases, and sitting in the darkness, addictions, like also we have like weed and so on, which causes neurodegeneration. And we have, of course, spending too much time on social media. They get a feeling of worthlessness. So there can be a lot of causes, but I think those are the most known and the most prevalent causes. And I think you should work on those first before taking any medication. Very important. And this explains why a lot of people have depression. If we now ignore a little bit the cause of it, because it can be trauma, a lot of things, it's mainly, I would say, like 3 to 4 things. So the first thing is they have an increase in inflammation in their brain. So they have the production of inflammatory cytokines in their brain, and this inflammation in the brain causes neuronal loss, so brains are dying, and decreased neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the production of new brain cells. It can happen, yeah, you can produce new brain cells, and the growth of the brain cells that you already have, which is very, very important for also memory and reduction of anxiety, and also for keeping your memories. This is why some people who have depression, or a lot of people who have depression, report mental decline and memory loss or poor memory. And so you have this inflammation in the brain, and you have also a reduction in growth factors in the brain. They are called neurotrophic factors. So you have like the cells being attacked from two sides. You have one side which is inflammation, and you have the other side which is a reduction of neurotrophic factors. And to add even more on it, you have also glutamate toxicity. Glutamate is like an excitatory neurotransmitter. It excites the cells, and you need it, but if you have too much of it, like the cells die. And this is of course horrible, because the regeneration of brain cells is limited, especially in the adult brain, and you cannot, or very, very extremely poorly replenish in certain regions your brain cells. So the whole volume of the brain actually decreases in the depressed brain, especially also in the prefrontal cortex, which is important for drive, motivation, and also like control of emotions. This is very important. And you have like decreases in the prefrontal cortex, especially there, and the reduction of neurotrophic factors. So we have those three problems. And you might be asking, okay, but there's still some improvement with SSRIs. How do they work? It probably does not have directly something to do with serotonin. It's more like they have like other effects because they increase serotonin acutely, but people are still depressed. It's probably because a lot of SSRIs decrease inflammation in the brain and also increase neurotrophic factors in the brain, so the growth factors. So they do it like indirectly. So of course, what we want for like depressed people is that they have direct medication that influences those pathways. So there are medications being developed right now, and they work directly on those mechanisms. Like for glutamate, you have the new medication esketamine. It blocks glutamate and it shows acute reduction of depression, or the symptoms of depression. Like people in hours feel much better. And of course now are like newer medications coming out to increase the growth factors in the brain, even like acting as growth factors in the brain directly, or reducing the inflammation in the brain, other medications. If you want me to do a separate video on it, I can do a separate video on it. So this is very interesting, of course. And those medications are showing more effects on depression and faster effects, because the effects on SSRIs usually take weeks to months, which of course cannot be explained by the serotonin theory. And yeah, that's it. I hope guys you like this video. If you have any questions, write them down below, and I recommend you to follow this channel to not miss any of this information. This is very important. It can change your life or the life of a loved one. Yeah.